So last time we went over the allegory of the cave. If you have your textbook with you, I guess you can open it to page 137. There's an illustration of the cave drawing. And actually there's also another chart on 132 that is of interest, right? I've drawn what we call Plato's divided line up here on the board. There's also a more fully filled out version of that on 132. But if you just want to look at the cave drawing for now, again, 137, it's much better than the drawing that I attempted last class meeting, obviously, right? We've got a professional illustrator here. So we've got our image of the cave, Plato's allegory of the cave, which I've already gone over. I've already gone through it, but we didn't do a whole lot of interpretation just yet. I gave you sort of a vague interpretation. We talked a little bit about Plato's forms. So right now, I guess I'll start off by giving you at least Socrates' interpretation of this allegory, what some of these images in his allegory are supposed to correspond to in reality. What is Plato doing here with this allegory of the cave? Then we'll walk through this divided line, each section. You'll notice that some of my terms are different than the ones in the book, right? We'll get to that when we get to it. And then hopefully by the end of the class, we'll even have time to tie up Plato and talk about some of the objections to his metaphysical theory of forms. So to start off, right, in the Republic, right after he gives this allegory, Socrates gives us his interpretation, right? Obviously, if you look at the drawing here, we've got two sections. One's labeled A and the other's B. The first two sections, 4 total. The first two sections would be the cave dwelling itself. That includes the shadows on the wall, the flame, all of this stuff. This is the visible realm, right? And so that's half the divided line right there, is the visible realm. This is the realm that we can see, that we can hear, touch, that we can get at through our senses. The realm that we're stuck in right now, right? We're in a body. Our body can feel, can touch, can smell, can do all these things. And so all that content is from the visible realm. Once we get out of the cave, though, I suppose, once we start walking out of the cave, we get on that stairway, that upward journey. Once we start to become educated and learn about the forms, start to have knowledge of the intelligible realm, right? That are these last two sections, right? The visible versus the intelligible. And remember, we were talking about this distinction between being and becoming. I think we already talked about this last time, and somebody gave me the right answer. Obviously, the visible realm is the realm where things become, where there's this constant change. And I want to remind you a little bit, think back to Parmenides, how this was a problem for Parmenides, one of the pre-Socratics. Perhaps I should put his name up here again. He'll pop up when we get to the end of the lecture. He'll pop up again, so might as well get Parmenides up here. Remember, Parmenides thought that change was a problem. Change happens, it looks like it does at least, but it's irrational, right? It makes things that are true now cease to be true, perhaps immediately afterwards, right? And Parmenides wants truth to be something stable. If we want to have knowledge of something, we want to know that it is that way, that it has being, and that we can always rely on that fact. We can always rely on the fact that 2 + 2 = 4, right? We can't rely on the fact that Helen of Troy is beautiful. Maybe she was, but she certainly isn't today. So there's a lot of logical conundrums that we have to approach when we analyze the objects of the visible realm. So you'll see a bit of an influence with Parmenides in Plato, but unlike Parmenides, Parmenides wants to just deny the reality of this realm. It just isn't. It doesn't exist. Your senses are tricking you. Remember, Parmenides thought there was only the one, and it didn't change. Well, Plato's not that extreme. He does acknowledge that this visible realm has at least some semblance of reality. It's just not quite as real as this intelligible realm. And what happens here, well, we'll get through this divided line eventually, and this might be something that you find unsatisfactory, we can't really have true knowledge, Plato acknowledges, of the visible realm, right? We can maybe have belief, or in your book, opinion, right, of things in the visible realm, but that's all it is. If we want to have true knowledge, it's always going to be of this world, the intelligible realm, okay? And we have glimpses into the intelligible realm. that's unsatisfactory about Plato, I think, is can we ever have true knowledge of the forms, full, complete, perfect knowledge of the forms while we're here on Earth? Can we? Do you think he's going to say yes or no to that question? Right, no, but specifically, why do you think he would say no? Why can't I really have full knowledge of the forms while I'm here in the physical realm? I'm in the cave, right? I'm stuck kind of in this cave, but let's try to, like, instead of using the story, let's interpret it. What is the real prison that I'm stuck in here on Earth? We're all stuck in it.
The physical realm.
Right, but what makes me, what is my relation to the physical? The body, thank you, right. My body makes me relate to the physical. Because I have a body, I have senses and all these other things, and the body gets in the way. My soul is sort of trapped in it. Socrates describes the body as a sort of prison for the soul, right? That's what he talks about in Phaedo. You know, and so maybe that's why he wants to die, so he's so eager to die, right? Well, if I die, then my soul can escape, and I can finally get to this pure realm of intelligibility and have true knowledge of the forms. No, that's good, right. In fact, when we get to Nietzsche, I think this will be a very relevant point. Nietzsche claims that this view is very, what he calls nihilistic. You are rejecting the sensual in favor of what? This emptiness almost, right? The Buddha's nirvana, Plato's good. We'll get to the good in a minute, right? But yeah, it's very ascetic, right? I think we mentioned this word before. Perhaps not. I probably should have mentioned it at least once. Perhaps when we were going over the Credo. Asceticism. Right? The word ascetic, it always gets confused with another word, aesthetic, right? Having to do with senses, right? Usually, or art. Some people use it that way, right? It's aesthetically pleasing. It's artistically or visually pleasing, but it's not the same thing, right? Asceticism is this belief that the proper way to live your life is to deny any sensual pleasures to yourself, right? So you get some religious monks, they go out to the desert and deprive themselves of any luxuries, like, or the Buddha, right, who goes out and, he gets down to eating 1 grain of rice a day or something like that, and like survive on that.
Like a dewdrop.
Right, a dewdrop of water from the blade of grass and 1 grain of rice a day, and he's fine, right? So he deprives himself of any extra, right? So it seems like what we're advocating here in Plato's work is a sort of asceticism. So you're right to point out in comparison with Buddhism. But why is the body such a bad thing? If I'm trying to be wise and seek truth, how does the body get in the way of that pursuit? Why would I be suspicious of the body in the first place, do you think?
Because we're always surrounded by our senses.
What's that?
We're always surrounded by our senses.
Okay, but what's wrong with my senses? You might say our senses, you've heard the expression, perhaps the senses can deceive you, they can be deceiving. How can they be deceptive? How do our senses ever deceive us? So if you can tell me that, maybe we got some argument here, because deception's not good. If we want truth, we don't want to be deceived.
I mean,
but
it's like the example that if 2 people witness an accident, they have several interpretations of what exactly happened.
Right, they call this the Rashomon effect or whatever. There's a great film called Rashomon that explores this very topic, right?
Right, and so the person A may see this happened and may feel that or whatnot, and the second person may actually feel a whole or see a whole different thing.
Right, and you think this is perhaps based on perception, sensual perception,
exactly.
Right? That we just see the world differently somehow. What's the expression? A man with a hammer sees the world as a bunch of nails, right? He's got this tool he wants to use, and everything's a nail. That's the solution to his problem, right? So, but let's, on a more basic level, though, a more innocent level, I guess is a better word for it. How do our senses trick us? What are some examples of when we're tricked by our senses? Maybe we see something that's not really there, or hear something that's not there. I mean, come on, we all live in Texas, right? I'm sure you've been on a road in the middle of the summer, a really straight road. You're driving down it, and you can see far ahead.
It looks like water.
Right, and you see little ripples of water on the road, right? And so our senses deceive us. It's not really there. It's just the refraction action of light, whatever, condensation, and the humidity. But what about when we take like a straight ruler and put it into some water, or maybe just if you put a straw into some water and look it through the glass? It looks, it's a little off. It bends a little bit, right? Does the straw actually bend or get larger under the water? No, it doesn't. So our senses deceive us in that way. So perhaps we can't trust them for that reason, but other reasons too. Why is the body not to be trusted? How does the body get in the way of me just studying my Plato and learning about the forms? What other distractions does the body, what other distractions arise in me because of the body? Sickness, okay, physical things. So I get sick sometimes, right? Obviously, I'm still getting over this sickness. My voice is not quite back yet. But, it gets in the way of me trying to teach you philosophy. It gets you in the way of doing things, right, when you're sick. I guess it's pretty uncomfortable for you right now getting around in this wheelchair, right? The body is an impediment. Wouldn't it be great if we were just minds floating around, right? I think Socrates would like that. But, so the body, it needs food. It needs sleep, right? And also, I hate to say it, it gets horny too, right? We have this thing called a libido, right? I hate to admit it, but yes, sometimes I too have these urges. And, I've tried to read my Plato, and all these pretty girls are walking by, and I can't just focus on the forms, I look at her form, not the right type of form, right? Not the correct form to be looking at. The female form is not what we're talking about, right? It's another topic. But, so I get urges, right? And I get distracted very easily. And so the body, is seen as sort of the enemy. When we get to people like Nietzsche, right, we'll get a critique of this attitude towards the sensual, right? He's not very happy with it. But for now, let's stick with Plato. There's other reasons we can criticize him. We'll get to those in a minute. But, so the body's not to be trusted. The visible realm is sort of just, it's almost like this purgatory where we kind of wait and see, and then when we are able to fully get out of the body, then we could probably get to the top of the divided line. But it's not going to happen here and now. But for now, we can do a few things. We can have glimpses, at least, into the intelligible realm. In fact, the intelligible realm, the forms, the ideas, these are what make the visible realm have any meaning to us. It's what, for Plato, it's what explains the existence of the visible realm, and it gives us, not just explains the existence of it, but it explains what it is, right? If I look at a chair or these desks, I think I was using this example last time, we've got two desks, we call them desks. How do we do this? Well, we have an idea, we have an understanding of what a desk is, and so we're able to look at objects in the world out there and call them a desk. Well, what makes them a desk? For Plato, they're a desk because they resemble that idea somehow. They participate in that form of deskness. Kind of a weird way of speaking, but nevertheless, this is how he puts it. So if we're going to walk up this divided line, let's try this. I think, didn't we do this last time? Did we start with the horse example and move our way through the... Not yet? No? Okay. So I'll get us started here, right? We're still in the visible realm, the physical realm, the sensual realm. I would say the actual flesh and blood horse that you could look at, you could ride, you could smell, whatever. Second section, right? The horse we can have beliefs, opinions about, okay? What would be below it then, do you think? On the lower level of the divided line. Think back to the cave, right? If you got that picture in front of you. What's in this section in the cave?
Be the shadow.
Right, the shadow. So what do you think, if we're sticking with the horse, what would be below it? The shadow of the horse, right? Or maybe the reflection of the horse in a mirror, or in the water, or a photograph of the horse, right? Just like in the story. In the story, this would be where the flame is, and that platform where all the puppets are sort of being wheeled out, right? That flame and those puppets are what cause the shadows on the wall, right? So just like that, the horse, the flesh and blood horse, causes the shadow of the horse, right? Or causes the photograph. If there were no horse, we couldn't take a picture of it. If there were no horse, it wouldn't have a shadow. So not only do the things in this section explain the things in the lower section, but they actually provide them with an existence, right? They wouldn't exist if it weren't for these in the higher level. And we see this pattern throughout the divided line. As we move up further the divided line, everything on the right is supposed to not just cause, but also explain everything to the left of it, right? So let's keep moving up, right? We've got flesh and blood horse here. We've got a picture or an image or shadow of a horse here. When we get to the intelligible realm, what do we do with horses? I'll give you another hint. We went over this word techne, right? This is when I develop a techne. That's why I think your author wrote science in this section instead of thought. I don't like that what he's doing, but I see why. What is a techne? Anybody remember that term? Back to the apology. We talked about it when we got to the craftsman. Socrates said that the craftsman had knowledge of their techne, but that was it. So what did he mean by that? What's techne? Yeah, skill, a science, you might use that term, right? I start to develop some sort of science of horses, sticking with that horse example, right? What would that be then? What would I call it, or what would the nature of that be? What sort of science or what sort of techne do we develop regarding horses? Right, yeah, I don't know what it's called, right? They might have some fancy name like ornithology, right? That's study of birds, ornithology. But I'm not a biologist, so I don't know. So we'll call it horseology, right? Horse breeding or horse training, you learn about all the different breeds of horse. You learn what they need to live, the nutritional needs of horses, types of horses, whatever, right? You're developing a theory in regards to horses. And so that theory obviously would help explain horses and not just explain them for Plato, the fact that we can construct a techne, the fact that we can construct a theory of horses allows us to understand horses, right? If we didn't have this, we couldn't intelligibly speak of horses or have any beliefs or opinions regarding horses, right? So again, things on this side always explain things below them. Okay, well, what do we do when we get to the top, now that we're in the last section, understanding? Now, this is where it gets pretty difficult, if it isn't already difficult enough. This is when we perform dialectic. This is what Plato calls it. It's his method his method of interrogation. How am I going to find truth about the forms? Right, that's what I'm dealing with here. I'm dealing with forms, the ideas themselves. How am I going to do this? He claims I do it through this method of dialectic. Well, what is dialectic? You might just do a Google search or something and look it up on the internet. You'll probably get a definition that's pretty close to what he's talking about. They'll probably say something like, a method by which opposing views are sort of compared to one another in order to arrive at the truth concerning some matter. And so it's almost like a debate, but it's not a debate in the sense of the debate club that you might have known about or maybe you were in when you're in high school, right? With debate club, usually the way it works is you got a debate coach and they tell you this is what you're arguing about, right? And you have to come up with a good defense of it. And the other team, same thing, right? You're going to debate the other side of the issue. And so there's really no concern with what the truth is. It's all a matter of being a good arguer, right? A good debater. And that's not what dialectic aims at. Dialectic really does want to aim at the truth, and I'm not supposed to make any claims that I don't believe in. I have to be very genuine about what I set forth as what I believe. So if I'm trying to figure out, for instance, if I'm trying to figure out what the form of justice is, right? I'm going to use dialectic to do this, according to Plato. But I'm going to start out by actually telling you what I think it is, what I truly believe it to be. I'll be as honest as I can. But that's not the end of it, right? I want to find some flaws with my definition, and I want you to help me. Let's engage in dialectic together. Why would I do this? Why would I put forth a definition that I was comfortable with, that I liked, and want you to argue with me? I want you to find flaws in my definition. Why? Why would I want you to do that? find your own opinion. Sure, you want to look for different views, right? But eventually we don't want to work with opinions. We want to have true knowledge and understanding. So how does being exposed to other opinions get you closer to that? One at a time.
Because you may not know like the whole truth, and somebody might know more of the truth. So if you like try and get more information, then you get closer to what you're trying to figure out.
Right. So I know that whatever definition I have is probably not perfect, right? So maybe somebody else can see what's not perfect about it, right? How it fails to completely encompass the form of justice. And then I say, oh, well, yeah, you're right. Those are pretty good objections. But let's try to work it out. Let's try to maybe change my definition so that I can, answer those objections. And if we do this properly, according to Plato, every step of the way, and it's a little swaying back and forth, but we're getting closer and closer to the true form of justice, or whatever it is that we're investigating. So that's what we do with dialectic. But we've left our horse behind, right? We sort of stopped at thought. We had the horse here in belief. Below that is the shadow, the image, whatever, the copy of the horse. Then we have the science of horses here. But up here, where's our horse? It's pretty much gone, right? We don't want to be thinking of very specific things once we get to this higher level of the divided mind. Why not? Well, to Plato, that's even further removed from the truth, right? From reality. It's too specific. What we need to do here is really think about how all of the different techne relate to one another. So I'm no longer thinking of specific things like horseology, right? Or the study of even music. I'm thinking about all of the standards, all of the regs and the norms that are parallel between all the different techniques, right? And for Plato, these are things, justice might be one of them, certainly beauty. This is a very high form for Plato. Apparently, there's a hierarchy of forms. Some forms are more important than others. And obviously, the good is really high up there. In fact, it's the highest form, Plato says, is the good. So when I get to do dialectic, again, I see how all the techne relate to one another. What do they all try to aim for? And for Plato, it has a lot to do with these, right? The higher forms, things like justice and the good. What am I doing when I do horseology, or whatever its technical name is, right? I'm trying to understand what makes a good horse, right? How do I make a horse that's good? If you're going to learn how to raise horses or breed them, are you going to learn how to raise them so they're not healthy, and they're not good, and they're bad horses? Is that what you're going to aim at? No, of course not, right? That'd be kind of stupid. I mean, what's the point in all that, right? You're aiming for what is good for horses. So good is something that seems to attach itself to all of our technes, right? It's something that's involved. If I'm doing music theory, even let's do music as an example, right? We've done horses, so how would this work with music? If I'm here at the lower level and I'm just way down in the cave and I'm a prisoner, this might be like when you were a child and you knew that there were noises going on, but you didn't really know what they were. And you're just sort of like, imagine you go to some concert and maybe it's like in a real not smoky club, because nobody smokes in clubs anymore. It's against the law, right? Just a little older than you, I guess. So let's say we go to some rock concert in just some little kind of seedy bar, right? And let's say these idiots have brought their kids there. They're pushing around these kids in a baby cart or whatever, right? To go see the Motorhead show or whatever, right? The baby is here, right? The baby is just like, what's going on? Sensory overload, all these people, noises. They really don't know what's going on. And then we have the people who are there who are almost, if you know the term, hedonistic. They're just enjoying the experience itself. Maybe they're slam dancing or something. They're in the mosh pit. They're really getting into show. Their adrenaline is pumping, right? And then we get to the third level. This is the guy who shows up and is maybe a really big fan of the band. He has all their albums. He knows, all the different lineups. Oh, this is their original guitars for the second album. He knows all the history of the band, maybe the genre, whatever. And then we get to the top, and I suppose this is the guy perhaps standing in the back of the room, just looking at, enjoying this experience completely intellectually, seeing how maybe the sociological, he's having a little sociology experiment in his head, thinking about all the different people and how they're interacting with one another. He's thinking about the music, the structure of the music, how that structure relates to mathematics and things like this, how it relates to other techne, right? Basically the nerd in the back who everybody's like, what's he doing, right? Basically is the deal, right? So there's all these different levels of, well, I don't want to use the word understanding because it's already up here, but there's all these different levels of engagement with the world around us, and the lower ones for Plato are very incomplete, right? We don't get a full picture of the whole until we get up to the top of the divided line. So this upward journey can be seen as education. When I'm getting out of the cave, I'm trying to educate myself. What am I trying to learn about? Well, eventually I want to learn about the forms. I want to learn about things like justice and beauty and the good. Right? So here, I'm just hearing noises. Now I know that there's different types of music. Oh, that's music I'm hearing. I might even know some genres of music, right? Here I go to school and I study music. I learn about the techne of music. I learn about composition, and I learn about whatever, the scales and circle of fifths and all that stuff, right? And all my cadences. And then once I learn all that, and I get to this higher level of understanding, I understand how music, the techne of music, relates to all the other techniques. What are the standards that are universal standards for all the techne, right? In other words, what makes everything good, okay? And what is the good? And why is it so important? Why is the good the highest form? In the story, the sun is supposed to represent the good. Well, what is the relationship between the sun, the actual sun that we see in the sky? Don't look at it too long. Don't look at it at all. But the sun up there, what's the relationship between the sun and the world that we live in here, the physical world? What's that?
It provides for us.
It sure does, right? It provides us with life. If there were no sun, there would be no life on this planet, right? We need the sun to live. So the sun provides us with existence. But not only that, if there were no sun, would we see anything? We couldn't see anything. Well, we'd be dead, so we wouldn't be there to see it, right? But it also provides light, which illuminates the visible realm. It allows us to see those objects, right? So just like the sun gives us life, creates, allows us to have existence, just like the sun does that, it also allows us to see the visible things. The good, for Plato, not only explains everything, but it provides it with an existence. If the good was not in existence, if there were no good, there would be nothing else. And so the good for Plato is something so high, it's so far out there, right? So beyond our understanding of this current level, right? It's not even on the divided line. You might even say the good itself is what sustains the entire line itself. It's off the grid here, in a sense. It's separate. So there is a standard of goodness which is completely independent from the entire universe itself. Well, what the heck is the good? That's a very interesting question. It's one that's very hard to answer. And unfortunately, Plato doesn't really provide us with a very clear answer. In fact, he's quite unapologetic about telling you he can't really give you a clear answer because the good can't really be put into words. It has to be seen, it has to be understood directly with your soul, and it can't really be articulated. It's beyond explanation. But given some of the passages that you read in Plato, I think he himself feels that he might have actually had an experience of the good. Right? He describes it almost in mystical terms. What do I mean mystical? What is a mystic? Anybody know what that, familiar with that term. A lot of religious figures are mystics.
One that has foresight or...
Well, that's more like a prophet or prophetess or a seer. But a mystic, what's a mystical experience? What's that?
Unreal.
Well, it doesn't have a semblance of the reality that we're accustomed to. It's not like in the visible realm, but it is, at least the mystic is going to claim it's real, that it really happens. Mystical experience, no.
Like spiritual.
Right. It has to do with the divine. And so some mystics will claim that you can have a direct experience of the divine. You can directly experience God. Right? He's not talking about God, he's talking about the good. But might as well be God, right? You can have a direct experience with this, and it's this sort of mystical, almost spiritual experience, which can't really be translated into language. It's beyond our thought, and beyond our language. And so you just gotta have to trust him on this, I guess. But let's try at least to say a little bit about the good and why is it so important for Plato. Well, for him it's the highest form of all, obviously. Remember when I was talking about the desk and I said, well, these desks, they're desks because, well, they resemble that form of deskness. Or sometimes Plato says they participate in the form of desk. So, yes, question.
I have a question. Yes.
Yeah.
You said that Plato said that for it to be good, you can't explain it. There's no words. You have to see it.
Right.
But wouldn't that be contradicting himself since you're seeing it, you're experiencing it? It goes back to the senses.
Well, it's beyond any sort of senses. Maybe if I said senses, I probably was speaking as being naughty. He would have stopped me there. It's not something that is sensual. This is a problem for him, though. We'll get to this when we get to the problem for him. It's not a sensual experience. When I say that's a good horse, right? The goodness that's in the horse, for him, it's just something, the horse resembles the perfect horse. It resembles the form of horse. It's close to that idea of horse, right? But no horse is ever perfect, but the good is perfect, right? No desk is ever perfect, but apparently the form of desk is perfect, right? So the form or the idea is supposed to present us with this exemplary prototype of what all the other objects fail to be, right? The desk isn't really the perfect desk. It never will be. Nothing in the visible realm will ever be perfect, right? But insofar as they're good, they're aspiring towards that perfection, right? And perhaps we could come up with a very clear account of what a good desk would be, or what a good horse would be. But as far as describing what good is itself, this is something he thinks that just has to be seen directly. And I'm glad you bring this question up because I was going to kind of skip over this, but I think it's important that Plato has this notion that we already have in us an innate understanding of the forms. It's just been forgotten. So we're born into this world, and once we enter into our body, all of the knowledge that we have of the forms disappears. We forget. But it's somewhere in there. It just has to be unlocked. So our soul is ready. Our soul's got all the ammo. We just got to locate it somehow. So when I learn something for Plato, it's just a matter of remembering it. So what are the ramifications of that belief? Well, for him, that means that I don't really learn through a teacher per se. All the teacher can do is point my soul in the right direction, right? I can't go down into the cave and force everybody to leave the cave. I could maybe do that physically, but they're not going to appreciate the journey. They're going to feel like I'm lying to them, I'm forcing them into it. I have to go down there and sort of coax them into, look, here's how you need to do it. But it's okay because for Plato, there's some seed in them, and I just need to find that seed. In fact, Socrates himself refers to himself as a midwife quite a bit. What's a midwife? What does a midwife do?
Helps mom give birth.
Helps the mother in birth, right? So we're all pregnant with knowledge, pretty much. Socrates is just there as a midwife to guide us through the labor, right? And so we can give birth to knowledge and understanding. The seed is already there, but the teacher is just sort of this midwife. So how does he prove this, though? It seems like it's really something to say. It's quite an assertion to say that we already have knowledge, it just needs to be remembered. Well, how does he prove that? He's got a couple of arguments. They're mentioned in your book. Probably the most famous one is the example of it's in one of the dialogues called Meno. And in the Meno dialogue, they're trying to figure out what virtue is. What is virtue? And Meno, towards the middle of the dialogue, he gets pretty upset because they're not really getting anywhere with their dialectic. And so Meno says, well, hey, Socrates, how can you go looking for virtue if you don't know what to look for? Right? If you have no idea of what virtue is, how are you going to know that you found it when you do? Right? And if you already know what it is, then you shouldn't go looking at all. Right? And this is when Socrates says, that it seems to be a good argument, but it's not. Really, we already have the knowledge of virtue, we've just forgotten it. And Meno's like, yeah, right. What do you mean we already have knowledge of virtue, we just forgotten it? Well, he says that's how all this knowledge is, how true knowledge is. Let me demonstrate. Meno has a slave with him, and the slave is not educated. The slave has never learned geometry. And I'm going to walk through this example pretty quick. It's a little bit more detailed than this. But Socrates just asks him questions. Socrates never tells him any of the answers. Socrates just asks the slave, could you draw me a square, please, with all equal sides, right? I want a perfect square. And the slave draws a square in the dirt, right? And so Socrates, he walks him through this. It takes a long time. But eventually, he gets the slave to tell him what the area of the square is, just by thinking about it, right? Well, there's 2 here, and if that was 2 by 2, what would that be? So what's the area? It's 4. The next Socrates asks him, could you draw me a square that is twice the area of the original square? The first thing that the slave does is he does this. Oh, twice the area, so I guess the length should be twice as much, right? But that doesn't work, does it? 4 by 4, that's 16. That's way more than twice the original square. It's only 4. So slowly but surely, Socrates walks him through it, and it takes a while. It's like page after page. He says, well, cut the first square in half, right? That's half the size of the first square. Well, if you take half and you multiply it times 4, what do you have? 1/2 times 4, 2, right? So that's 2 times the original square. This square in the middle, I'll shade it in, that's twice the area of the original square. The slave has never learned any geometry. Socrates simply asks him questions, never tells him anything, just asks, are you sure that that's twice the... No, you're right, it isn't. So apparently, we just have this innate ability in us to know what's true and what isn't, especially when it regards to these very straightforward things. We have this sort of common sense, and certain things are self-evident. So when I get out of the cave, when I'm trying to educate myself, it's a matter of remembering things. If you're not convinced, another argument. Let's say I go onto my Facebook page, which I don't do very often. I didn't think about getting rid of that account because I never look at it. But when I do, let's say I get one of those, people you may know, and I see a picture of one of my students there, right? Which often happens for some reason, right? So I say, I see a picture of Kimberly on Facebook, and I say, geez, that's not a very good picture of her. Or it's a good picture. That's a really good picture. Either way, whether I say it's a good or a bad picture, don't I have to first know Kimberly? Or at least be acquainted with her? If I've never met her in my life, let's say it was over the summer and I got this, I wouldn't say, hey, that looks like Kimberly, a student which I will meet in class next semester. I couldn't do it, right? So I already have to have knowledge of her before I can understand whether it's a good or a bad photo of her. Okay, Okay, and when I make this judgment, good, bad photo, what am I doing? Don't I also have to have an understanding of equality or inequality in order to make that comparison? I have to have a notion of what Plato calls the equal, the form of equal. Why do I have to know what equality is or inequality to say that's a good picture or a bad picture of Kimberly? Why would I have to know the equal to know that or to say that? What am I doing? What does equality have to do with anything to make a comparison between two objects? What am I saying when I say it's a good picture of Kimberly? I'm comparing. So the picture is more equal to her than this other one. Like, this is a bad picture. That doesn't equal the real Kimberly, right? But this one is more close. It's not her, obviously, it's a picture of her, but it really gets, her look. It looks just like her, right? It's equal to her. Well, where do I get this idea of the equal from?
By what she looks like.
But no. Just let's step away from Kimberly, though. How do I get the notion of just the equal at all? That something is equal to something else. Where does that idea come from?
Your idea was...
The idea, right? But where does the idea come from? Did I get that idea from my senses? Plato says no. There's no way. Why not? Well, if I'm looking at, let's say I have two pebbles on the ground, and they look pretty similar. They're like these desks, right? Hey, that desk is equal to that desk. And I know what I mean, but is it really true? No. And is it ever true that some physical object is equal, absolutely equal to any other physical object? No. So for Socrates, for Plato, we never could have gotten that idea of the equal from the visible realm. It had to be an idea that was there in our head already. We already have an understanding of equality. We already have an understanding of goodness. We know that was good or that was bad. We just know it. And we might not be able to fully develop these ideas, maybe not until we're dead, until we get out of this body and we're just pure soul. But he's going to assert, he's going to insist that the ideas are there, that they're innate, the forms are innate in us. And so education is a matter of unlocking that knowledge which is already there. I kind of like this, whether or not it's true. I think I like it just as a theory of education. I think too much people see education as a passive type of experience. I was watching some documentary about a year ago. What was it? That Waiting for Superman. Maybe some of you have seen it. But it was about the educational system and how it's failing in this country and what the problems are and how we need to address these problems. And I think in the middle of the film, he revealed that perhaps they didn't see the full picture. Maybe I'm just being nitpicky, but there's a part in the film where they showed a cartoon, and they were talking about, I think it was teacher unions or something, and how the unions get in the way of the teachers doing their job, right? It should be so simple for the teachers to do their job. Give them a classroom and some students and the proper materials, and they know how to do it. They know how to teach. And it was a cartoon. It showed a teacher walking around a classroom and like opening people's heads and pouring numbers and letters into their head, right? So there's this idea, this conception, which I think we get, a lot of us get, that learning is just a matter of being some sort of knowledge receptacle. I'm here, plug in the knowledge, please, right? I'm just going to sit here, right? We think it's like the Matrix. I just take a pill and I'm all of a sudden a kung fu master, right? I think Plato's picture of education is more realistic, even if he's wrong. There's something in you that has to be willing to learn. You have to go seeking knowledge, and you have to find it in here and think about it, deal with it yourself. It's not just a matter of having a good teacher. Just because you have a good teacher doesn't mean you're going to learn, right? If you come to class, you're taking a nap or whatever, you're sitting in the back with your arms crossed, you're thinking about how stupid philosophy is, and how you can't wait till, when is this class going to be over? When's he going to shut up, right? Are you going to learn a damn thing? No, you're not, right? So it's like what the Buddha said, right? When the student is ready, the teacher will appear, right? I could give you the best lecture in the world, but if you're not receptive to it, it's not going to work. So the cave dwellers can't be forced out of the cave, right? They have to, of their own volition, do it. Their soul has to be guided in the right direction, right? So I kind of like this, to be honest with you. But it's not that Plato isn't without problems. I think we've done enough explaining here. he certainly has quite a few problems, but I think to his credit, he points them out himself. He knows that his theory is flawed, and he tries to work it out, I think, in his later works. One last thing before I get to the problems. I just erased this arrow, and I remember what I drew it for. I've already kind of said this, but just to reemphasize it. As I get further up the divided line, things become more real for Plato. So the forms have more reality than even the physical world. That's so there's apparently there are gradations of reality. So it's not that the images or the shadows aren't real; they just have less reality than the true forms. Right? They always are as they are. They have full being. But even though he says they're real and they are the most real things in the universe, there are still some problems with them, which he is all too happy to point out. And he tries to solve these problems in his later work. But his solution to the problem, or the problems, his solution is pretty complicated. I think that you really shouldn't try to understand it or even read about it unless you want to be a graduate student or something in philosophy, right? So since most of us here don't fit that category, I'll have mercy on you, and I won't explain his solution. It gets very complicated. But the problems themselves, I think, are pretty straightforward. They're pretty simple. And in his later career, Plato writes a dialogue called Parmenides. So it features Parmenides, right? The monist. Remember, Parmenides believed that everything was one. That's known as monism. The universe is all one substance. So in the dialogue, Socrates is supposed to be pretty young. Some people think that Plato did that for a reason. He makes Socrates to be in his early 20s or mid-20s. That way we know that these problems are things that he's going to eventually deal with, right, when he gets older. But in the dialogue, Socrates runs into Parmenides, and he runs into a guy named Zeno. Both Zeno and Parmenides are monists. Zeno kind of does most of the talking. Your book is wrong. He says that Parmenides does it. He misquoted it, which is, I make mistakes. He did too. Zeno does most of the talking, but dialogue's named after Parmenides. They bump into Socrates, and they hear about these forms, right? The theory of forms. And they kind of tease him about it for a while. That's really cute, Socrates. You've got this idea that there are forms, right? When you see things that are big, there's a big elephant, and there's a big house. You assume that there must be this thing called bigness, which explains that, right? There's this form of the big. That's really nice, Socrates. Well, tell me this. Is there a form of horse? And Socrates says, well, yes, I believe so. Is there a form of man? Yes, I believe there is. I'm a man, you're a man. We both participate in this form of manness, right? We resemble that form of man. Okay, that's really cute. That's nice. What about mud, Socrates? Is there a form of mud? He scratches his head. Well, I don't really know if I don't like that. No, maybe there's a form of water and dirt and they mix together. I'm not sure, right? Well, why not, Socrates? Why does horse get its own form, but mud doesn't? Exactly how do you determine what gets a form and what doesn't? And exactly how many forms are there? Right? That's one of the problems, right? How many forms are there? And how do you determine this? Plato does not really give us a very clear criteria for this, or really any criteria. I had a student one time ask me, is there like a form of iPod or something like that? The perfect iPod in the sky? Every iPod that comes out is trying to get closer to that perfect iPod. Or maybe there's like just a form of music player. And every music player, like the A-track was like not very close to the form of a perfect music player. Most of you don't even know what A-tracks are, right? Or an LP, right? That was cool, but it was too big and bulky. It wasn't the perfect way of playing music. What gets a form and what doesn't? Is there a form of thumb? A form of hair follicle? What's the deal here, right? We don't have very clear criteria for this. So that's one problem with the forms. Another problem with the forms is known as the problem of participation. What does it mean that the what does it mean that the particulars participate in the form? That's often how Plato puts it, right? I have a desk, it participates in the form of desk. Well, how does that work? Is there like this big, great form that like covers, part of it's covering that desk and part of it's covering this desk and it's spread out? Well, it doesn't, apparently for Plato, the forms don't have any physical properties, so that wouldn't work. So what exactly is this relationship between the forms and the objects which participate in the forms? Another way you might ask this is, what is the relationship between the visible realm and the intelligible realm? What exactly is it? Plato says that the intelligible explains and causes the visible, but how? How does it do this? We don't really have a good account of this in Plato. He wants to provide one in his later work, but again, it gets very complicated, very complex. Another problem, this is known as the problem of self-predication. You might ask, are the forms predicated of themselves? That is, are the forms true of themselves? Is the form of good good? What do you think? Yes, he thinks it is good. By the way, also, this might be a problem. Is there a form of the bad? No, he says. No. All the forms are good. That's probably another reason why the good is so important. If all the forms are good, then they all have to participate in the good, so they all relate to it. But he says, no, there is no form of bad. What bad is, if I walked over to this desk and I kick the leg off of it and it breaks, it becomes a bad desk, right? Well, what does that mean? For Plato, it's further removed from that perfect form of desk. So it's further down the divided line. It gets demoted somehow, right? And I guess if I keep mashing it up until it's just a pile of rubble, it has no relation to the desk at all, right? It's not even a bad desk, it's just a pile of materials and things like that. So badness is just when I fail to, if I'm only bad insofar as I fail to reach that perfect form that I participate in, right? So
That's just a lack of good.
precisely. That's a good way of putting it. I like that, right? Bad is just a lack of good, right? If that helps, right? It might be confusing to some people, but I know what you mean, and you're right. So the form of good is good. It is predicated of itself. The form of justice is just. The form of beauty is beautiful. But what about other forms, like the big? Is the form of the big, is it big?
Only in relation to something smaller than itself.
I like that answer. In fact, that's kind of what he does this a little bit in Phaedo, right? He says, well, Socrates is kind of short compared to everybody else in the room, right? If Socrates stands next to Phaedo, he looks pretty short. But if everybody leaves the room, and then there's a little mouse in the room, Socrates becomes closer to the form of big now, right? But then when Phaedo shows up, big kind of runs a little bit away from Socrates and gets a little closer to Phaedo. Well, that's kind of silly. It sounds like forms are moving around in the air and getting closer. We relate to them, but they're not supposed to be located anywhere. But I heard somebody say, no, the form of big can't be big. Why not? Why can't the form of big actually be big?
Because in relation, the universe is so big that there's not a defined definition.
Something's always big, right? So no matter how big it is, then there's going to be something bigger. But also, doesn't bigness, don't you have to take up space in order to be big? Right? As it's big, it takes up space, right? A lot of it, for the type of thing it is, or whatever, right? But do the forms take up space? No, they're not supposed to properties. They're just ideas, right? So if I say the form of big is big, well, that doesn't really work for him because then that gives it physical properties, right? So yes will not work as an answer. If I say that the forms are predicated themselves, why not? Right? That connotes physical properties, which are not supposed to be applied to the forms.
So there's no big form because big is a quality.
Well, it's a physical quality.
Yeah.
Right? Right. So no. Well, but here's the problem, though. If I say that the form of big isn't actually big, well, then what the heck is it? Right? If I talk about the perfect horse, right? The form of horse, that's a little clearer, right? I can look at an actual physical horse and say, geez, that's a healthy horse, but maybe its nose is a little crooked, or it's a little off, right? It could be better, right? But when I talk about the big, right, what properties am I using to say, that is a big dog, or no, it's not? What am I talking about if I'm not talking about physical space?
Isn't that why they created that equalism?
Well, the equal, right, I don't know, now you're getting complicated here. Is the equal necessary to understand bigness and smallness?
You have to have a set standard for everything in order for you to compare it.
Oh, okay. Maybe indirectly we might need equality or an understanding of it to know big and small, right? So equal would be a higher form than big and small. And big and small, you might say, something that's big is not equal to the average of that type of thing. It's
The quality of the equal.
right. But even when I talk about, a bigger quality, how can you be more equal?
No,
It's like equal is equal is
It's
equal.
like big is one of the parts of the equal.
Now I'm just getting confused. I don't know. Does that enlighten anybody?
It's sort of like to be equal, you kind of have to have everything the same, and one of the things to be the same is to be the same size, and big would be part of that.
Okay, all right. So yeah, I say two elephants are big, right? They share this property of bigness, so they're equal in that sense. Oh, okay, good. But still, what is this bigness you're talking about? They're equal with this. Yeah. So I think if I say no, I lose a lot of what I call explanatory force. I don't have this explanation. I don't have this understanding that I'm supposed to get at that higher level of the divided line. So we lose,
Soundness.
well, not exactly soundness, not in our use of the word, but we lose intelligibility, I think. Explanatory force. I completely skipped this. I shouldn't have. The word logos, because we talked about this with Heraclitus. For Plato, it means something different, right? When I'm done with dialectic, this is what I'm supposed to get, right? I'm supposed to get a logos, which for him it means a rational account. I give you an account that is rational, so you can understand the form, whatever it is we're using dialectic to uncover. He says the logos is the song that the dialectic sings. So if I do dialectic correctly, I'm supposed to be able to explain and understand things. But I don't think you really explain much if the big isn't big. Well, what exactly is this idea of bigness? You have to kind of use physical properties to describe bigness, I think. And here's another problem too. I think it ties into this problem here. Socrates in the Phaedo talks about the beautiful. He says, well, look, if somebody asked me what the beautiful was, I wouldn't tell them all these fancy things like it has to do with, shape or the way that colors are presented with one another, right? Color schemes and things like this. And I don't talk about design, all the fancy stuff that you might learn in art theory or design class, right? I'm just simply going to say that things are beautiful because they resemble the form of the beautiful, okay? Well, let's imagine I don't know what the word beautiful means. And I just hear people using it all the time. And there's a beautiful woman, there's a beautiful sunset, there's a beautiful carriage, whatever. And I want to know. So I go to Socrates and I say, what is this beautiful that everybody speaks of? What are they talking about when they say that things are beautiful? What does that mean? Well, the short answer for him is going to be Well, those things they call beautiful, they resemble the form of beauty, or they participate in the form of beauty. Am I going to have any understanding, or is that really a logos? Is that going to explain the beautiful for me? Not really, right? And so it seems like in some aspects they fail miserably at doing what they're supposed to do, right? The forms are supposed to explain things, but some of these other concepts that are sort of vague, like beauty and bigness, they lose that. Right? You don't seem happy. You want to hold on to Plato longer, huh?
It's one of those things where you think beauty would just be closer to the perfect form.
Well, beauty is a very important form. It's right below the good, right? It's the second highest, right? Because all the forms are not just good; they're also beautiful, but not beautiful in a physical sense. Like, hey, check out this beautiful girl. No, that's just my opinion, right? In reality, beauty's higher than physical attraction, right? Maybe if I loved her soul, that'd be closer, but still, her soul is beautiful because why? She has knowledge and personality. She has knowledge of what? The forms. So the forms are even more beautiful than that beautiful soul. And beauty, what is that? He says the same thing about beauty he says about the good. You'll know when you see it, and you probably won't see it until you get out of this thing, this body, this physical body. Okay, last but not least, we got to hurry up here, right? Don't we? No, we don't. What time do we have? We got 10 minutes, 15 minutes. Okay. Well, we won't get to Aristotle, but we'll finish Plato today. So that's good.
Are there like Plato monks who just sit around and think about this all day?
There are some Platonists, but it's very rare. I think that a lot of mathematicians are Platonists, at least with regards to mathematics. They think, well, numbers are real, but where are they? Right? A circle is real. Where is it? It's in Plato's heaven. It's a form, right? So there are a few, but it's pretty rare to find somebody who's a full-fledged Platonist. There's a lot of Plato scholars, right, that study Plato, and they use a lot of his ideas, and it's very fruitful. But completely falling for the forms, I don't know. It's pretty rare to find these. A lot of theologians. Yeah, if you go to a religious college or university, you might find a Platonist, right? They usually will change the word good. They'll get rid of one of the O's. That's usually what they do. Right? And that's kind of what Augustine does. We'll talk about him later on this week, right? Okay, but last but not least, we got one more problem with the forms. This is known as the third man argument. And they explain it a little bit differently in your book. I don't like the way they do this. They kind of smash together 2, 3, and 4. It's confusing as it is, and maybe it's more confusing the way I do it. But I think at least it's a little slightly different argument than these ones. It's its own problem. In the Parmenides dialogue, Plato is already talking about the form of big. So he talks about bigness with this problem, right? So it would be the third big argument. But I like Aristotle's version better. It's a little bit clearer. He uses the form of man. So let's imagine, according to Plato's account, there's this perfect man in the sky, right? In Plato's heaven. The form of man. So according to him, if there's this particular man down here on earth, he somehow participates in that form of man. He resembles it. He's not perfect, right? This is the perfect man. He's real handsome and chiseled features and intelligent and one of the Greek statues, all buff and whatever, Olympian, whatever, right? And of course, this guy's not perfect, right? Maybe he's got a handsome face, but his feet are really ugly and hairy or something. He's got like hobbit feet or something, right? So there are certain characteristics that they share. And there are certain things that distinguish them. And according to Plato's own argument, in order for us to make that comparison, we have to have another third idea that, they're equalities, they're inequalities, we were talking about that earlier, right? There has to be this third theoretical posit, this third idea, this third man, if you will, which explains the relationship between the two, right? The features they share and the features that they do not share. But that's not really the end of our comparison. According to Plato's own logic, he could be wrong with this, but according to his own logic, they're similar, we can compare this third man to our flesh and blood guy, right? There's certain things that they share, certain features they share, certain features that they don't share. So not only do we have a third man, but we really also have a fourth. And you might see where this is going, perhaps. Aren't there some features between the third man and the form of man that are similar? Right? It's not perfect, but there's obviously features they share. Now, I don't know if this is possible. I don't even want to try it, but someone like Aristotle, someone like Plato wants to say that if this is true, we can go on forever. That there's what you call an infinite regress, where we keep repeating these steps over and over again, and it never ends. And we never get any explanation out of it. It's not like we know anything more about the form of man than we did before. It's not that we know anything more about this object here on Earth than we did before. In fact, we're probably even more confused than we were to begin with. Right? So, because of this infinite regress, because we'll never come to a stopping point, people like Aristotle and even Plato himself thought that this won't work. We have to explain better we have to explain better how exactly these objects relate to each other, right? How does the form relate to the guy? We need to be more clear about this, and Plato thinks that he can do it, the problem will disappear. Again, I don't want to give you that solution. It would probably take all semester, and it's more like a graduate level type question. And if you're confused about this, what the heck is he doing here? Really, I think this is just a much more sophisticated version of that second objection, right? What is the nature of participation, right? How do the forms relate to the objects, right? If you're not clear about it, and you by your own logic, we'll never get clear about it, okay? So, that's it for Plato, unless there's comments or questions. I say that's it for Plato, but he sort of seeps his way through the history of philosophy up until at least Nietzsche, so don't completely forget about him after the first test. If there aren't any questions, I guess that's it for today. Thanks for suffering through the metaphysics.